on completely innocent people. Fox News producer Tadek Markowski is live on the phone now with us from London's Russell Square. Tadek, give us a feel for what happened at Russell Square.
Well, I'm looking down the block and I can actually see the bus, and the explosion must have been enormous. I've been speaking to people coming out of businesses near the blast, and they're saying the buildings shook. Another eyewitness said to me he went in there and he said there were just people on the ground. He said he saw one woman was practically cut in half. So I'd be very surprised if this scene that I'm looking at, the fatalities don't run into the double figures, because quite literally there's debris strewn across the street, and tragically there is blood splattered against the British Medical Association building, and it's a very grim picture. Amazingly, doctors inside that building were the first on the scene, and they gave some immediate medical treatment to those who are most badly injured. So some glimmer of goodness out of this absolute disaster.
Well, you know, initially we saw reports of 2 dead in that bus explosion, and I've seen 7 reported dead, but from what you are observing, it could be even worse than that.
I think so. I'm talking to people who are being brought out of there by the police, and one man said, you know, people were in shock. You know, 5 minutes after the blast, he said they were literally blown off their feet, and when they got back to their feet, they just didn't know what had happened, and they were just wandering aimlessly. A blast of that size, and I can see how far the debris has been thrown. If there was just a average number of people on that bus, then the casualties would be, as I say, in the double figures.
How are people of London reacting? What's your observation?
Well, stoically, I think, is the word. You know, they realize that there are people out there in the world that want to do harm to people here in this part of the world to promote the various causes. But I think they're looking at this as, you know, maybe it's just one of those things. You know, they're not saying necessarily it was our turn, but certainly that it isn't unexpected, and now we're going to pick ourselves up and go on.
It's not unexpected, but it must be quite a stark change from the elation yesterday in being chosen to host the 2012 Olympics.
Absolutely. I mean, people are basically, you know, waking up today to the Olympics hangover, and then this. I mean, waking up to, you know, 4 major blasts in downtown London. It is a real rude awakening, and as your guest said a little while ago, you know, the focus on Glen Eagles, the security around that. You know, people almost took their eye off the ball in a sense, where the danger was here, right in the heart of our capital city.
Tadek Markowski, Fox News producer. And by the way, folks, our producers do so much great work, and when they're out there on the scenes, they know as much as the people who you typically see, the reporters out on the scene, because they're working hand in hand on things like this.
All right, and what we are waiting for right now, we want to take a quick break and then continue our coverage almost immediately. To the left of the screen, it would seem, it would seem that a news conference is indeed getting underway right now. This is the Emergency Services News Conference, and we were expecting from that news conference perhaps to get an update on the number of casualties, expecting somebody to walk up to that empty microphone momentarily there in London. But we can tell you this, obviously the numbers tragically have been rising through the course of the morning. A few hours ago we had heard that only 2 people have been killed. Many people said at the time, well, that number is bound to go up, and indeed it has. The latest that we've heard officially was that at least 40 people were dead. Now we've heard some other reports that those numbers could rise as well. The number of injured could be some 1,000, and among those 1,000 people injured, some 150 people seriously injured. Now, as you know, that is because of the horrible nature of these attacks, that they occurred in the subway stations, and that there were a total, as far as we understand right now, of 4 attacks.
And, of course, 3 of those coming on the tube, the train system there, the underground train system. Amtrak is announcing that it has increased the level of the railroad security level, increase the security level in response to these terrorist bombings on London's transit system. And of course, that's the passenger train, carries people all around the country. And whether it's announced or not, I'm sure we're seeing changes in the security levels with the Metro North that you see around here, Long Island Railroad, as well as the subway system and the subway system, the Metro, there in Washington,
right,
D.C.
A lot of the times as security is heightened, we don't even
right.
realize that.
They don't necessarily announce it, but you walk around, you can see a difference.
Nonetheless, what we've heard from official Washington is that there is no effort underway to raise the national terror alert level. There have been no threats made here. If you're wondering who's behind this, and of course everybody is, there has been a claim of responsibility from a group called the Secret Organization of Al-Qaeda in Europe. They posted a claim on the web that has not been immediately confirmed, but our people in Washington are working to determine if that is authentic as well. Wendell Goler has been following the story from the summit in Glen Eagles, Scotland. Wendell?
Bridget, here at the G8 summit in Scotland, the work goes on minus Prime Minister Tony Blair, and the leaders have canceled all their public appearances for the remainder of the day. They were in their first working session when word of the bombings arrived here, and Prime Minister Blair says there is no doubt at all they were timed to coincide with this summit. Each of the leaders consulted with their home governments. President Bush convened a secure teleconference with national security officials back in Washington. After that conference, security was visibly tightened on Washington's subway system, the Metro Rail, and also we just heard Amtrak is tightening security. Mr. Bush said every leader here has suffered from terrorism. All offered condolences to the British people and expressed solidarity with Prime Minister Blair.
All right, Wendell Goler in Glen Eagles. Wendell, we thank you. And once again, the president, when he spoke earlier this morning, had a warning for Americans to be extra vigilant, as we say. But important to point out that even though our people in Washington are obviously aware of the situation in London and security has been heightened, as we just told you, Amtrak, various transportation systems, important to note that our national threat level has not been heightened. By the way, just want to let you know what you're looking at the left of the screen there is finally the people are gathering in London. I shouldn't say finally, obviously a horrible situation over there. We are expecting this news conference to start during the course of this hour. This is the London Emergency Services. They're holding a news conference, and it looks like they are just about ready to start. But again, the latest numbers, 1,000 injured, more than 40 dead. Let's listen.
He will give you a brief update of the position. We will then hand over to representatives from the other emergency services, London Underground and Transport for London. At the end of this briefing, there will be an opportunity to take one-to-one questions, and there are opportunities afterwards for one-to-one interviews with the speakers. Thank you.
Good afternoon. The first thing to say is that the Police Casualty Bureau is now open for friends and relatives who are concerned about those who may have been killed or injured in the incidents today. The telephone number is 0870 1566 344. 0870 1566 344. In terms of what exactly happened this morning, at 8:51 this morning there was an incident at Moorgate, around Moorgate, Liverpool Street, Moorgate East underground stations. Confirmed explosion 100 yards into the tunnel from Liverpool Street station. It was believed that the train involved is either a central or a circle line train, and there are 7 confirmed fatalities in that incident. At 8:56 this morning, at the King's Cross Russell Square incident, again 21 confirmed fatalities in that particular incident. At 9:17 there was an explosion on a train coming into Edgware Road underground station, which blew a hole through a wall onto another train in an adjoining platform. In fact, it's believed that 3 trains were involved in that particular incident, and so far there are 5 fatalities in that particular incident. And then at 9:47 there was an explosion on a bus at Upper Woburn Square junction with Tavistock Place. There are fatalities in that incident, but at the moment we cannot confirm the numbers. So 4 devices, we believe, involved in today's incidents. The police service received no warning about these attacks, and the police service has received no claims of responsibility from any group in connection with these attacks. This clearly was a callous attack on purely innocent members of the public, deliberately designed to kill and injure innocent members of the public. That's all I have to say at this stage, but I can answer questions afterwards.
Obviously, London's transport is facing some very challenging times at the moment. The Underground won't be in action until tomorrow. The bus services, we hope, will come back on in central London later on this afternoon. And the overground stations, King's Cross, will be closed. Liverpool Street is currently closed, and Victoria is closed due to a bomb threat. We hope that will be open quite soon. The situation is fluid. There are a number of bomb scares, as one can understand at a time like this. But we're doing our very best with Network Rail and the other operators to open up the systems as best we can. And we'd like Londoners to start thinking about their journey home and to make sure they check whether the services are available and then to start to make their way home. Obviously, we don't want a great rush out of central London, but it's going to be a very difficult evening to get people away. But I know that everyone will be working together to try and get people home as best we can. So our encouragement is to check on those systems and then for people to start to make their way home as reasonably as soon as possible, without a great rush all going off at the same time from offices. So we'd ask people to think carefully about their journey back tonight.
The London Ambulance Service has been working alongside other emergency services throughout today to respond to the explosions across London. We have been assisting with the rescue effort and assessing and treating at all scenes to ensure that the patients receive the medical attention they require. We have treated 45 patients with serious or critical injuries, including burns, amputations, chest and blast injuries, and fractured limbs. We have also treated approximately 300 patients with minor injuries, including lacerations, smoke inhalation, shock, cuts, and bruises. Patients with life-threatening or serious injuries were stabilised at the scene before being taken to hospital by ambulance staff from London Ambulance Service and other neighbouring ambulance services. Patients with minor injuries have been treated at the scene and, where needed, taken to hospital by non-emergency medical staff, voluntary aid ambulances and indeed public buses. Hospitals who have received casualties include the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel, University College Hospital, St Mary's Hospital in Paddington and the Royal Free Hospital. Over 100 ambulance vehicles and more than 250 ambulance staff have attended the incident scenes, supported by staff in our control room. Over the course of this incident, many hundreds of calls were received by our control room staff. We are asking members of the public not to dial 999 unless they require treatment for life-threatening injuries at this time. Can we also ask that people do not go to their A&E departments at hospitals in central London unless absolutely necessary, so that those departments can continue to focus their efforts on treating casualties from this morning's incidents? Thank you.
The London Fire Brigade was able to receive the call at our regional control centre and respond quickly and effectively to the tragic events that unfolded in London today. These were, of course, the kind of events that London firefighters have been planning, training and equipping for, and today came the reality. Obviously, firefighters and the other emergency service workers witnessed some very harrowing scenes today, and they performed magnificently in the face of that challenge. Certainly, we would like to offer our condolences to all of those that have injured or lost loved ones. We still have firefighters at the scenes and are still assisting in the work they have to do, and we will be there as long as it takes and needs to be there. We attended with some 40 fire engines and specialist equipment designed just for this purpose, together with over 200 firefighters today in London.
These were my passengers. Let me tell you, all of us send our condolences out to their families and all those who are involved in this. When we, as the situation unfolded, we felt we had to shut down the system and remove people from the trains because we didn't know how many more incidents there might be. The staff performed magnificently. Well, of course, my staff had to deal with this in the 10, 15, 20 minutes before others could be there, and the reports I've gotten have indicated that the intense pride I should feel about them. They've done a fantastic job. They did a very difficult job, and they did it well. We are now in the process of getting clearance from the police to getting out on the property to inspect all of the trains. Once the trains are inspected, we will try to get drivers to them and move them to depots so that they can be secured. Our ambition is to have a service for the morning. If we can, we will run some service late tonight on unaffected lines, such as the Jubilee, the Northern, and the Victoria, but it is unclear. It will all depend on whether we have the crews. Even when we start up tomorrow, though, keep in mind where these incidents occurred, which will no doubt be held as crime scenes for some time. We will not be able to run any service on the top side of the circle. So that means it's likely the H&C service will be out. Certainly there'll be no Circle Line service. We won't be able to run the Met past Baker Street, assuming we can get into Baker Street, and it will be, at best, a shuttle service on either end of the Piccadilly line. But we hope to run a full service everywhere else, and we're going to get this system up and running as quick as possible. Thank you.
On behalf of the Mayor, the Commissioner of Transport for London, and the whole of us at Transport for London, we send our condolences to everybody affected, and I send my thanks to the bus staff who've responded very well today. When the first incidents occurred on the Underground this morning, we opened the bus service to all tube passengers, but then of course a little later we were advised by the police to withdraw the bus service out of Zone 1 substantially, which was done. The bus service is just starting to return to Zone 1. It will take some time to get back to normal, and as it gets back to normal, additional police officers, wardens and bus staff will be out to help at major points like Oxford Street and so forth for the evening rush hour. Clearly the bus service can't serve areas where the emergency services cordons are still there, and particularly in the sort of King's Cross, the Aldgate areas and around Russell Square. We will have to either institute diversions or curtailments, and we'll attempt to get details of those out as soon as we can. The bus service can cope with an awful lot of extra people, but it will be slow to get home. As Andy Trotter said, we would like people to stagger their homeward journeys because we clearly can't cope with everybody who would normally start off between 5 and 6 this evening. We will try to, as hard as we can, and we'd ask travellers in London to bear with us and to bear with our staff, who I know will rise to the occasion. Buses in London are currently being searched regularly and certainly at each end of the journey, and that will continue until further notice. I should also say that the Docklands Light Railway is resuming, that on the roads we have had messages up since early this morning asking people not to come to central London. They will be in place for the rest of the day, and the congestion charge was suspended this morning for the day. Thank you.
Clearly, we are very concerned about those who've been killed and injured, and we are very concerned about the impact that this is having on families and friends. I have to say that since this conference started, unfortunately, the Police Casualty Bureau has developed a technical fault, and we would ask people to be patient with us while we try to rectify that fault.
Okay. We will take questions now from the floor. Could you please raise your hand, identify where you're from and who the question is directed at? Thanks very much.
John Speaking from the Daily Press. Can you tell us anything at this stage about the devices and whether or not you suspect these actions were carried out by suicide?
At the moment, we don't know whether or not this was suicide bombers or whether this was simply packages left on the bus and in the underground stations. It's too early to say. Again, there is no indication that these were anything other than conventional explosive, but other than that, we don't have any information about the size or type of device that was used.
Have you started going through CCTV cameras? And if not, when will you be doing that?
Clearly, we've had considerable success in the past using closed-circuit television footage in order to trace the movements of the people involved. That will be one of our first priorities, as well as securing whatever forensic evidence we can secure from the various scenes.
Question in the middle.
Can you tell us whether you've had made any arrests throughout the course of this morning in connection with this at all?
I don't have any information at this stage of any arrests having been made in connection with these incidents.
Question for the London Underground. Are there any people still trapped underground?
No. The system is clear.
And when were they last? How long did it take to evacuate people?
Well, the entire system, almost all of the system was cleared within the first hour or two, but the people on the Piccadilly line train, it took the longest to get them clear. There was difficulty getting access to all of them. I don't have an exact time when we got the last person off.
Do we have any estimate how many people died on the bus?
We don't have any information at the moment. We know that there were some fatalities, but we don't have any numbers at the moment.
Question at the front.
Penny Marshall, ITV News. Can you tell us at this stage how many members of the anti-terrorist squad are involved in the investigation and what they're doing, why they're not here?
Members of the anti-terrorist branch are fully involved investigating these incidents. That's why they're not here. I'm the spokesperson for them, as well as the rest of the Metropolitan Police Service. Their time is much more valuably spent investigating these incidents. We're not prepared to discuss how many detectives are involved in the investigation at this stage.
Question there.
Stuart Tendler from The Times. Should the security level have been higher today, given that it was the launch of G8?
The security level in London has been high over recent months. We have had all the security services actively engaged in anti-terrorism activity during this period. We have given advice and we have received cooperation from the transport services around raising people's awareness of the possibility of suspect devices, and so we are content that the security level was appropriate, even notwithstanding the fact that G8 is happening in Scotland.
Question there.
Sean Raymond, Sunday Telegraph. The security level was actually lowered within the last month to its lowest level since 2001. Can you comment on that?
The security level was lowered slightly from the very highest, other than having specific information about a specific target. It is at its second highest level, and we felt that that was appropriate in all the circumstances, bearing in mind all the intelligence that we were in possession of.
we're not going to start getting into risks, threats, or anything like that today. This is about actually telling you about the response to the operation. So I would appreciate if you could confine those questions to the response to the operation from the emergency services rather than the investigation stage. Thank you.
How many police officers have been involved? Sorry. How many police officers have been involved on the ground in this morning's response, and are you recalling any officers from the G8 summit to help deal with this?
We've got about 1,500 Metropolitan Police officers deployed to Scotland. We have 31,000 police officers in London. We have more than enough police officers to cope with this sort of emergency. At this stage, we have used officers who were on duty during the course of these incidents, and we have not called officers in who were off duty before, because clearly this is going to take some time in order to restore London to normality. And clearly we have to bear in mind that we're going to have to bear in mind resilience in terms of keeping the policing going during this period. In terms of exact numbers, we haven't had a head count.
Simon.
Sorry, the British Transport Police obviously attended these calls when they first came out, and it has put a great strain upon us, without a doubt. We have a number of officers in Scotland as well for G8. We won't be bringing any back from there, but we will be bringing in as many officers as we can on duty in order to cope with the pressures we're going to face for the rest of today and into tomorrow.
Simon.
Andy Trotter and Brian Paddock, can I ask, what is your reaction basically to the fact that the nightmare scenario has happened? And what does that say about the counter-terrorism measures that have up to now been deployed?
Well, both the current Commissioner, Sir Ian Blair, and the previous Commissioner have said that London has always been a terrorist target. And we are clearly shocked by what has happened today, but we're not surprised at what's happened. We have worked over recent months and years with British Transport Police, with the City of London Police, with London Ambulance Service, and with the London Fire Brigade, and all the other emergency services, rehearsing and planning for exactly this sort of scenario. And so, right from the word go, we were able to implement this well-rehearsed, well-planned incident response, and as far as the Metropolitan Police Service is concerned, that plan has worked exactly as it should have done.
I mean, very sadly, all the practice that we put in, all the London forces together, plus the other emergency services, the plans that we've worked on so hard were required today. And as far as that response is concerned, the response worked extremely well, but it's a very sad day that we've had to actually bring this into play.
Question at the end.
Sally Jones, Dow Jones Newswire, has a question for DC Paddock. Are you still looking for devices? Can you confirm this?
Clearly, we want to make sure that the transport system is safe, but otherwise we don't have any intelligence that there is a threat from other devices. So in the absence of any specific intelligence, we are nonetheless being very vigilant, as our colleagues have said from Transport for London, to make sure that buses and underground trains are searched before they're brought back into service.
Question there.
Jean Whalen with the Wall Street Journal. I just wonder, were there any power surges then, or what was that about this morning, the reports that there were power surges in the
I think Tim O'Toole can answer that question.
There were not power surges, but what happens is when you have an incident of this magnitude, its first manifestation is in the control rooms of the power, because the first thing that happens is the traction current is shut off. When there was the read that there was power withdrawn at different places on the network, the assumption was by some people that there must have been a surge to cause so many breakers to trip out. Further information quickly came in that there was a derailed train at Edgware Road, and then speculation occurred that somehow that must have come in contact with the major power cable, and did that have an impact? And then the rumors just kept running, but there was never any power surge, and indeed the traction current network to the underground is completely intact right now, and we could run a full service were it not for these criminal scenes.
I will get for as many questions as possible. One in the front row.
Andy Gardner, Sunday Mirror. Tim, 27 minutes between the first blast on the tube and the last blast. I know it was chaotic, but did you issue any warnings to your drivers?
They happened almost, our read was that it all happened within 3 minutes of each other. We didn't really have time. That was the report.
There's the update from London Emergency Services, that news conference that they had promised. And just to give you a brief recap of the casualty figures, we are now hearing 33 people have been killed in the 4 separate blasts. However, very important to note that number does not include the number of people who might have been killed on the explosion on that double-decker bus, in which the top of the bus was just sheared off. We understand 45 people have been seriously or critically injured, many of them burn victims, some of them, sad to report, amputations. Some 300 more people have been treated for minor injuries. However, there was one glimmer of good news. Nobody else is trapped in that subway system. In fact, they said that they would be able to reopen it if it weren't for the fact that right now it's a crime scene. Nick Fielding with the London Sunday Times is with us on the phone. And Nick, where were you when the blasts happened?
Not far from the site of the explosion at Edgware Road, and first of all I noticed on the radio they were saying that the tube system had been closed down. Then very shortly after that I received a call from my colleague saying could I get to the Edgware Road site, and in fact we'd had a call. One of my own colleagues was actually on the train that was hit this morning, so I was down there I suppose just short of an hour after the incident occurred. One of your colleagues was there. I'm afraid to ask how that person is. She's shaken, but she's fine. She's not injured physically, but obviously she's been through quite an experience. Well, that is good news. Now, the Edgware Road, I understand that the officials at this news conference were just saying that some 3 trains were damaged. My understanding is that 2 trains, that possibly 2 trains were passing each other when the explosion happened, and that there was some sort of collateral damage to the second train. I don't know about a third train, to be honest with you, but from reports I've heard this morning, certainly on the train on which there was an explosion, there was extensive damage. I heard one person saying that the floor had been almost ripped apart in one of the carriages, so that must have been quite a serious explosion. Nick, we just got the update, all the numbers, the facts and figures, if you will, from the officials at that news conference. But can you describe for us what the scene was like and what the response was like? Well, I tell you, it's quite remarkable because even certainly within the hour, there was a massive presence of the security and emergency services at the site. I mean, I was amazed. The roads were already by that stage fully blocked off. There were at least I could see at least a dozen fire tenders. There were dozens of ambulances and police cars, and I saw forensic teams going in. I saw sniffer dogs. I saw the London Metropolitan Hotel, which is very close by. That was being used as a casualty station, and I spoke to one of the people that had been helping there, and they had got organised very rapidly. A doctor had arrived very quickly. There's a hospital just around the corner, and she had organised a triage system. They very quickly grouped the patients into those who were most serious and lesser serious and so on, and then began treating them and dispatching them to hospital. So the scene that confronted me really from the outside, and of course I haven't seen and couldn't get anywhere near the seat of this explosion, but the scene from the outside was one of sort of fairly calm determination, and I'm sure that it must have been chaos in the immediate aftermath, but within a very short period of time they seem to have got things under control in terms of dealing with the incident, and I think that probably is a credit to the services here, who have obviously rehearsed for these kind of incidents, and they unfortunately, sadly today, have had to put them into practice. All right, Nick Fielding, thank you very much for that report. And David Asman is joining our coverage here in Studio B. Just to bring it back home for a second, related to the bombings, of course, at 11:45, that's about 1 hour from now, we're expecting a press conference from Secretary of Homeland Security Michael Chertoff. He's going to be talking about what is being done here in the United States in response to what has happened in London. Of course, we will carry that live right here on Fox. And related to that, we are being told now that the terror alert level just
for trains in the United States may be raised to the orange level. This, according to a senior law enforcement official. The terror alert level will be raised to orange for U.S. train infrastructure. That includes local subway and commuter lines all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast. So once again, we are responding here in the United States to what is happening in London. Our own Fox correspondent Amy Kellogg is live in London. I guess, Amy, it doesn't hurt to emphasize here that Londoners have been through a lot dating back to the Blitzkrieg in World War II, going through the IRA terror bombings. So they do take this with a stiff upper lip, don't they?
David, those were my thoughts exactly. In fact, last night I was reading about the Blitz in preparation for a big ceremony that is going to be held here in London on Sunday in commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the end of World War II. And as an example, they are saying today that that ceremony is going to continue. The Queen is going to be holding quite a display here and a huge parade, and they plan to go ahead with that. Now, again, there has just been a shocking series of events here in the British capital this morning, a number of coordinated attacks on the transportation system. As we've been telling you about all morning, 3 explosions on the subway, or as they call it here, the underground, the tube, and then 1 on a bus. 33 at this point confirmed dead, 45 seriously injured, 300 treated for minor injuries, a lot of so-called walking wounded. But those death figures, David, do not include victims from the bus, and there were fatalities from that bus blast, but at this point we don't have any indication of how many there were. Police just held a press conference and they said that no one has claimed responsibility. That said, some previously unheard of group linked to Al-Qaeda called the Secret Group of Al-Qaeda's Jihad in Europe did claim responsibility on a website. Apparently that's not being given full credence at this point. It was shocking that this happened this morning, I think, David, because Londoners were so jubilant last night celebrating the announcement that London had won the bid for the 2012 Olympics. There was a real carnival atmosphere here in London last night. And then Prime Minister Tony Blair up in Scotland trying to bring the world's most powerful leaders together to attack the problems of poverty in Africa and climate change. And then this happening just less than 24 hours after all of that. Quite a shock, although I think people were very prepared that at some point there would be a major terrorist attack in the British capital.
The press conference that we heard in London, Amy, did not address the potential cause of these blasts. Of course, it was a terrorist blast, but we don't know whether it was specifically whether it was a suicide, homicide bomb or not, do we?
No, we don't. We don't know. We did hear one of the police spokesmen say at this point we don't know if the explosions were caused by packages left on the subway trains and the bus or whether suicide bombers were involved. Right now, David, that all of the underground stations are basically, or at least the 3 where these bombs went off, are considered crime scenes. The anti-terrorist units are there combing through the debris to try to come up with some clues and information as to exactly what happened.
Amy Kellogg reporting live from London. Bridge?
All right, and before we go to our next guest, just want to repeat that new information that U.S. trains now, not the entire nation, the alert level, the national alert level has not been raised. However, U.S. trains are now on an orange terror alert because of what's happened in London. That would affect all local subway and commuter lines. Expecting to hear more from the Secretary of Homeland Security, Chertoff, coming up at 11:45. Of course, we'll have his remarks. Just to let you know, Tony Blair, as we told you, the British Prime Minister, after making some remarks this morning from Glen Eagle in Scotland, the site of the G8 summit, he left the summit. We understand he is now back in London, and perhaps we'll be hearing more from him. I believe an emergency session of Parliament is to be convened at some point this morning, so more to come on that. Let's talk with Marvin Kalb right now, Fox News analyst and foreign affairs correspondent. And Marvin, the G8 summiteers, Marvin, who are still there without Tony Blair, I wonder if there will be a renewed focus now on terror.
I guess there would have to be a renewed focus on terror. On a day like this, it's a very good day for globalized rhetoric of sympathy for the British and what it is that they are experiencing. But all of these men are experienced diplomats, and they recognize that national interests do come into play. For example, when the United States was thinking about war in Iraq, the United States was able to get the British in quick alignment, but the French, the Germans, the Russians were not. They were opposed to the war. so that when the bombs go off, when there is a terrorist assault, there is a kind of global sympathy. Everybody bands together. They do talk about the need for common action against terrorism, and probably a great deal of that goes on. But when there is fundamental action involved, national interests come into play, and then it's very difficult to get everybody together. It's time in the post-Cold War period for a new kind of alignment of similar nations, but they haven't really got there yet.
Right. So, Marvin, is that to say that we should not expect any more practical help in fighting the war on terror, any more help from European allies in Iraq or Afghanistan or any of the other places where we have to fight?
It does not appear to be the case. I mean, for example, on Iran, it would appear that all of the countries around Iran and the Western nations dealing with Iran ought to have the same policy, but they don't. They don't really. The Germans and the French and the British have one policy toward Iran. The United States really has a different one. So that when there are national interests, when something is truly important, then nations begin to think about themselves, although their rhetoric may be global, their interests are rather selfish and narrow.
It was very interesting to hear the very similar language among the various leaders, the mayor of London,
of course,
the British Prime Minister, the President of the United States, all making it abundantly clear that this was an attack not on the high and mighty, not on the powerful. This was an attack on the working stiffs of the world, the innocent people.
Well, and that is absolutely true. I mean, the people who engage in this kind of terrorism are bloodthirsty killers. They are interested in inflicting massive damage on innocent people. That is the way they make their point. Lenin, at the time of the Russian Revolution, said the purpose of terrorism is to terrorize. And that is what these people are doing. They're trying to terrorize. And so it is the responsibility of leaders to try to put things into perspective. But let's be real at the same time. Campaign last year, the president was saying that we are fighting in Iraq so that we do not have to fight the same terrorists in the United States. Turn to the British. They are fighting in Iraq, and yet they have to fight terrorists in Britain today, in London, in the heart of a great, great city. And also we ought to point out that London, of all of the major capitals, is probably best prepared to face just this kind of tragedy. And yet London has to face it acknowledging that they had no advance word, just as we have no advance word for any kind of an attack on an American city. These are people who are bloodthirsty, but they calculate coldly, and their designs are against Western interests.
Right. And, you know, interesting talking about London and the determination of the people there, the people who've been through the Blitz, who've been through the terrorism on the part of the IRA. And Tony Blair, even though he faced a tough re-election, I would think, Marvin, that this would only steel his resolve, despite all the criticism, all the flack he took over supporting the U.S. in Iraq.
Oh, I agree with you completely. Tony Blair is a man, from all of the evidence that we have, is very much like President Bush. They are both determined to take on global terrorism, no matter what the domestic political costs may be. Obviously, they are both politicians. Obviously, they want to be elected. And even when I pointed out before that the president last year said we fight in Iraq in order not to have to fight at home, I believe the president might have meant that when he said it. But that doesn't mean that that's what the terrorists intend to do. They could be operating on several timetables all at the same time. They could be setting off bombs in Iraq, setting off bombs in London, and planning to set off bombs in the United States, whether or not we had troops in Iraq.
Marvin Kalb, good to talk with you this morning. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Bridget.
And this is a Fox News alert. The city of London under attack this morning in 4 bombing incidences. We don't know exactly the cause of the explosions, whether they were suicide bombers or packages of bombs left on the subway system. But the Piccadilly line in particular in central London was affected, as well as a bus. 33 people are confirmed dead as a result of the subway blast. Police and emergency workers are not giving us a specific number number of dead with regard to the bus blast, but again, there were fatalities there. We are being told that as many as 45 people may have been killed, about 100 people very seriously injured, 45 critically so. 300 people have been treated so far as a result of these blasts. The repercussions affecting not only Europe and the rest of England, but also the United States. Told that an alert status of orange, that is an upgrading of our alert level for Homeland Security, specifically regarding our transportation system. Not the planes, but trains are involved, and public transportation systems in cities across the United States have been affected. We're told now that Chicago trains have been upgraded to the orange level of alert, as have the train system, the BART train system in San Francisco, as have the metro system in Washington, D.C. and New York. In about 45 minutes, we should be hearing from our Homeland Security Secretary, Michael Chertoff. He's going to be alerting us all as to the upgrade in the security concerns in the United States, specifically regarding the transportation system. He will be taking questions about other issues as well. Our own Greg Kelly is reporting from inside the Beltway on the very latest. Greg?
Hi there, David. As you mentioned, the Homeland Security Department in 45 minutes will make that announcement, formally upgrading the terror alert status of the U.S. train system, including basically everything that runs on a rail: subways, commuter trains, Amtrak, freight trains. All of it will be upgraded to orange. Now, what does that mean? Well, technically, yellow, where we are now, is a significant risk of terror attack. At orange, we are officially at a high level of terror attack. What does this mean practically? Well, perhaps not very much, because a lot of municipalities, as you have already mentioned, are already increasing their security in and around their trains in their cities. It's happened here already in Washington, D.C. and in New York City. New York City is permanently on orange alert. Here decided early this morning to put their police department on orange alert. Some of what this means: it means keeping police officers on duty longer. If they get off at 8 a.m., they'll stay on duty till 12 noon. They're also increasing their law enforcement presence in and around trains, the hope to ward off any potential attackers. They are bringing in their bomb-sniffing dogs. You are seeing some police officers armed with heavy weapons. There's also an inconspicuous law enforcement presence, undercover agents going into the trains, actually riding the buses, looking for anything suspicious. I'm also told that law enforcement has, they're not quite calling it a day yet, but they have experienced something of a sigh of relief. One law enforcement official noted to me that the last bomb blast in London took place at 9:50 in the morning, 10 minutes before 10 o'clock. In transportation circles, in law enforcement, rush hour is considered the time between 7 in the morning and 10 in the morning. Now, they believe that rush hour was targeted to do the most damage to people. Now that it is 1 hour after 10 o'clock, they feel like they may have made it through this initial test. Of course, the day is not over. They have to deal with the nighttime rush hour. But once again, the top news for the moment is that the decision has been made, according to law enforcement officials, that the terror alert level will be raised from yellow to orange. And this is in part in response to criticism in the past when they have blanketed the country in an orange alert level. Some law enforcement officials across the country expressed confusion. Now we are seeing more and more a tailoring of the alert system to the specific situation at hand. We saw that last summer when certain financial districts were protected, increased security in Washington and New York, and now it's happening with the U.S. train system.
Greg, a question. The terror attacks in London clearly were coordinated. We had these 4 attacks. However it was they were coordinated, they seem to be timed to happen around the same time. Any indication from folks inside the Beltway that the folks in London who were responsible for this may have coordinated attacks for elsewhere in the world?
There's no specific indication of that, but as you mentioned, it leaps out at you that it was coordinated there. Another law enforcement official told me that there is an even more disturbing pattern, what happened in London, that the initial explosions happened underground, that the latest explosion, I am told, happened above ground. The thinking goes that people were forced out of ground, from underground, from the subways, to what they thought was safety, and then they started hitting them above ground. Really nasty tactics.
Nasty and cowardly. Greg Kelly reporting from inside the Beltway. Thanks, Greg. Bridge?
Dave, I want to go to the phone to Anna Poukas with the Daily Express out of London. Anna, can you tell us where you were and what you saw when these blasts began this morning?
Well, I just started work and noticed that all the streets were completely log-jammed. And then very soon we discovered that there had been these blasts at 6 underground stations, we were told. The theory, one theory that's being speculated upon is that there were this series of small blasts underground which forced people to the surface and buses and other modes of transport, and then they get on a bus and that goes off as well. The scene at the moment is in many ways similar to yesterday, in that people are walking in the streets. Yesterday when we were celebrating the winning of the Olympics, but of course.
And I need to interrupt because we need to go back to Sky News right now because we have some eyewitness accounts from the injured.
Next time we heard some guys were shouting at the far end of the train that it was fine to get off. They'd be taking people off the back end of the tube.
So that was the one story told from a hospital bed of a young man who has survived this attack today. There are sadly some families numbering at least 33 people have been killed in these various incidents today, so their family and friends will be hearing the worst possible news later this afternoon or evening if they don't know already. Now that number of 33 at least have been killed. We do suspect that number will have to go up. Other sources suggest it's going to be nearer 43, perhaps 45, because we do not know about the Tavistock Place bus bombing. We understand there have been fatalities there, but the authorities cannot confirm how many.
We can hear now from somebody involved with the emergency services. We've got an interview with Dr. Gareth Davis, recorded a little earlier. He is a spokesman for the London Air Ambulance. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Hospital. Today we mobilised a total of 18 doctors to the incidents that occurred throughout London, where we were able to provide intensive care at the scene of the incident and deal with the injuries that patients had while they were actually trapped in the wreckage of the vehicles and in the tube.
Where did you go first?
My first mobilisation was to Aldgate.
And what did you find there?
We found essentially a lot of walking wounded outside of the tube station. A few people had been brought up out of the tunnel and were lying in the foyer, but we had a lot of seriously injured patients who were still trapped in the wreckage on the train itself in the tunnel.
What sort of condition were they in?
Well, it varied very much between walking wounded with just cuts and scrapes, and obviously people who had very severe injuries who were unconscious.
When you look back on what you've seen today, when you reflect on what you've seen, what's your overall impression? What impressions are you left with of the day?
That's probably a bit early to say. I'm very much focused on how the medical response was actioned, and at the moment I'm just left with that. I'm very sort of happy and proud of the way the teams responded to the scene.
Did the air ambulance save any lives today?
It wasn't just the air ambulance. It was the 18 doctors were mobilised by the air ambulance, but also in fast response cars. There were approximately 4 doctors and 4 paramedics at each of those incidents, and undoubtedly lives were saved by the teams at the scene.
So how many people?
These are our pictures live from King's Cross, people emerging from their places of work, planning to get home, perhaps leaving a little earlier than normal, anticipating some severe difficulties. Of course, we were hearing that news conference warnings by those involved that it would be a difficult journey home this evening. As we're looking at those pictures, let's just bring you up to date with some of the news lines to emerge on this. The US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice has apparently called our Foreign Secretary Jack Straw to offer assistance following the London blasts, not detailing which or what scale, but there has been contact between Condoleezza Rice and Jack Straw. Worth marking that the US has raised the terrorist threat level for mass systems, but not during the bomb blasts in London. That is according to a US government official being quoted on the news wires. Also, some information, a message from Pope Benedict XVI to Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, of course the leader of Roman Catholics in England and Wales. His Holiness is deeply saddened by the central London, offers fervent prayers for the victims and for all those who mourn. While he deplores these barbaric acts against humanity, he asks you to convey to the families of the injured his spiritual closeness at this time of grief. So they're the latest news lines to emerge in the last few moments.
London Underground remains closed for the rest of the day, resuming service tomorrow. There were some caveats to that from the London Underground representative we heard from, Tim O'Toole, saying maybe some of the ones that run overground might come back on stream tonight. But that's a fluid situation, he said. Stay tuned to the media for more updates on that. Docklands Light Railway, the DLR, services coming back on stream as of about half an hour ago. Bus services expected to be fully up and running within the caveats of these crime scenes being ignored or bypassed, of course. You can't run a bus past those at the moment. It's from about this afternoon. And national rail services being resumed. Major terminals reopening. Victoria Station, I think, is the one exception to that. There was a quite separate investigation as to whether there was a bomb scare. Now, we heard from Russell Smith of the London Ambulance Service in the press conference. I think he can speak to us now live from that centre. Mr. Smith, thank you for your time this afternoon. How have your staff coped with what they've had to do today?
Well, this has been a difficult day for our staff, a difficult day for our control room staff, who have taken hundreds and hundreds of calls relating to this incident, and of course a particularly difficult day for the technicians and paramedics of the London Ambulance Service, who have gone to these scenes and dealt with the traumatic events. They're professionals and they've trained for this, so they have coped with it, but no doubt it's been a difficult day.
The multiple call-out within a time zone of about an hour, was that a problem for you?
We have good staffing at that time of day.
All right.
So.
Again, just to give you a recap, if you're just turning us on, 4 blasts in London, 3 out of 4 of them involving their subway trains, the 4th shearing off the top, absolutely destroying this double-decker bus. We're unclear of how many people might have been killed on that bus, but what we understand is there have been 33 deaths associated with the other 3 explosions, 45 people seriously or critically injured, and some other 300 people treated for minor injuries. Nobody else is trapped in the subway system in London right now, but it is going to stay, for the most part, shut down. Very important to note that our national security threat level has not been increased. However, there is news about the trains. The American trains are now on an orange level. State. There has been increased security. We're talking about local subways, commuter rails. The security level for airlines has not been increased, although there probably will be some increased security measures, no doubt, taken at various airports around the nation. More about our nation's response coming up in the form of a news conference expected at 11:45 Eastern Time from our Homeland Security Secretary, again, 11:45 Eastern, and we will have that for you here on Fox.
And what you are looking at right now is a live picture from the King Cross train station, the Tube, as they call it in London. It's a subway system, one of the most extensive in all the world. It was between King Cross, which you're looking at now, and Russell Square, which was a stop right before King Cross, that one blast occurred. There were 2 others. One at a place called Edgware Road, another subway stop, and one, in fact, a subway stop that, interestingly, is right around a community of Muslims, showing that these terrorists are indiscriminate in their concern for Muslims or anybody else. Aldgate is another place that was hit. You can see it in the bottom right-hand corner of that map on the right. So those 4 stations were affected by 3 blasts, one of which was between Russell Square and King Cross, and then Tavistock. Now, Tavistock Square is where a bus was literally ripped apart. The total damage, the carnage of that blast, we're not sure of. Police and emergency rescue workers gave us a 33 fatality figure for the 3 blasts inside the subway stations, but that blast, the one that tore apart the top of this double-decker bus, we don't know how many fatalities that were involved in that. Initially, we were hearing that a suicide-homicide bomber was responsible for that blast, not unlike blasts of its kind in the Middle East, but we can't confirm that as of now. As all of this information comes in, we'll report it to you as soon as we get it. Keep it here on Fox. We'll keep you updated. Meanwhile, as we said, 11:45 is when we're going to be hearing from Michael Chertoff, Secretary of Homeland Security, talking about our alert level being raised to orange for transportation system, specifically railroads. Joining us now on the phone is Neil Livingstone. He is a terrorism analyst joining us to talk about this. Now, Neil, one question I have is whether or not why isn't the entire transportation system of the U.S. put on orange alert?
Well, because we saw rail attacks in this case, and as we did in Madrid. And part of that is because I think the government believes that we've substantially increased the quality of aviation security in the United States, and therefore we could thwart any attack at the present time, or we certainly have a much higher probability. Rail, by contrast, is used by tens of millions of people every day. There are stops everywhere. It's very, very difficult to protect, and so they're concentrating their resources on that.
Now, we are fighting an enemy both in Iraq and elsewhere in the world that learns from its own mistakes, as we've been told time and again. Is it not conceivable that they would choose a different form of transportation for the next attack?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the problem of predicting any terrorist attack is that it's almost impossible to do. We have so many vulnerabilities. We cannot protect everything 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And so they could, if we tighten up rail transportation security right now, they could move on to hitting power plants or hitting financial institutions or something else. So this is a maddening exercise, one that shows basically the vulnerabilities we have in modern society today.
We're going to be hearing from our Secretary of Homeland Security shortly, Michael Chertoff. He's going to be telling us about the raising of the orange level. How should that affect individuals who are going to be taking a train? I mean, this is a very busy time of year for travel.
Well, it is a very busy time, and it's really going to affect daily rail commuters more than anyone else. And a lot of that it shouldn't inconvenience them all that much. Now, they may tighten access to some rail systems, subway systems, so that you have to pass monitoring points at this time. There will be more police presence. There'll be more awareness on the trains themselves. And what they may be looking at right now is how do they prevent future attacks? And part of that may be that just as we do at some stadiums and so on right now, we limit what you can carry onto it into stadiums. And we may have to do that on rail as well. That you can't carry large packages. That you cannot carry backpacks, for example. Those have been some of the suggestions that have been put forward, because we know we can't X-ray everything, and we know that we can't make everyone walk through magnetometers. The scale of it is just too great.
Now, Neil, will we likely see any shutdowns of rail services, particular commuter lines?
I don't think we'll see shutdowns because of the impact on the economy and people's daily lives, unless they get a specific threat. And if they think that they've got a specific, credible threat against a particular rail line, they might indeed decide to shut it down.
Neil Livingston, CEO of Global Options Incorporated. Neil, thanks a lot.
Thank you.